Hi, I'm Dan Schmitt, and I'm at Buzz Walnut Swap Meet. Every year in the spring, this is the granddaddy of them all. This is the biggest swap meet in the Chicago area. Buzz Walnut and me go back many, many years. In fact, he used to come out to Santa Fe when I was racing at Santa Fe. So, I'm doing this opening for a show that I shot back in 1993. I worked with Ron Hetland, who owned Vespa of Chicago. I was restoring my brother's 1956 Vespa, who I should point out I broke my leg on that thing, but that's a whole other story, and I'll tell you about it. You can send me an email. But anyhow, so I restored the Vespa for him. We're taking the engine apart, so you're going to learn quite a bit about two-stroke engines by watching some of this. And he's got a collection of some other scooters. So it's a pretty interesting show. I had to dig it out, because another show I'm going to be doing is I'm heading over to the Claremont collection, and they've got a whole group of Vespas, so I want to use some of that footage together with that. So this is the show from 1993, working with Ron Hetland at Vespa of Chicago.
My name is Dan Schmitt, and this is Team Chicago Challenge. We're back at Vespa of Chicago. We're going to continue. This will be part 3 of our show, Restoring a 1956 Vespa. Ron Hetland is with me again, the owner of Vespa of Chicago. And we're going to try to take this engine apart, and step by step, Ron's going to explain how a Vespa is put together, but also for people that want to know how an average two-stroke runs and how it is put together, Ron's going to be able to answer the questions. You think so, Ron? Or?
I think we can make a good run of it.
Okay, well, I'm going to go behind the camera so we can get some nice tight shots. I'm going to talk to Ron from over there so you won't see me anymore. And also, Ron's got a collection of some real strange scooters that you picked up in the last 6 months. And we're going to go look at these different scooters, and you can explain how each one's a little bit different. Plus, you got that real weird one from Japan.
Oh yeah, the newest one.
So let's go start taking this apart, and we'll take a look at these scooters, and we'll try to explain as much as we can about this Vespa engine.
So before we explain the magneto, basically all these engines run on a magneto system. It's not a battery-fed ignition. So as soon as the magneto, which we've already removed, spins around the coils, it creates the electricity that fires the coil, which fires the spark plug, causes the whole thing to run. So the first thing we start to disassembly, which we did before, we pull our cylinder and head off, pulled our flywheel off, our clutch cover. Now to get the cases separated, the next thing we'll have to do is actually remove the magneto from the engine. First thing we're going to have to do is pull this outer shroud, which is where the air is forced over the cylinder. Which is this assembly right here. The air is swirled through, forced down over a cooling shroud right over the cylinder. And that's what keeps the engine cool. Remove this, it's generally held on with just a few set screws. Okay, once we get that out of the way.
It's pretty easy, Ron.
They always come apart this easy.
Okay. So they don't get stuck in there, huh?
No, you got to be careful on these. A lot of times the aluminum against the aluminum will corrode. And every time that happens, you got to be really careful. Maybe with WD-40, let it soak for a little while. Don't force it though. Don't jam screwdrivers in between. Don't hit it with a hard hammer. Use something like a wooden mallet or a rubber mallet. Okay, now another important thing is this whole stator assembly here is basically your timing also. Now the only time that this will change is if someone physically goes in here, loosens the screws, and moves it. So important thing before you take it out is to mark the positioning of the stator plate to the case. All right, and after that's done, which we've done already here, you remove the screws and pull the...
As Ron stated, I usually use a pointed punch to mark the engine case and the backing plate of the magneto or the stator, depending on what ignition you have. That way you'll know where the timing was set, and you can put it back in the same location. Now Ron is going to remove the kickstart lever and start to split the cases.
Shifter linkage. Now the older style shifter linkages, they went up on top. This is a very pain in the butt one to get out. There's 2 set screws which hold this assembly in, and what it basically is your shifter fork.
So that's an external shift mechanism, or are the newer ones like that? Or?
The newer ones, they repositioned in another spot.
Okay, but it's still external like that?
Yeah. Now to remove it from the case, you've got to depress the kickstart lever. When this is done, this assembly lifts right out. This is what actually activates the shifting cruciform to cause it to shift gears. We can get more into that when we get inside the case. You can actually see where it...
Now, this only has a 3-speed. Now, all Vespas only have a 3-speed. They never went to...
No, they went to a 4-speed.
Oh, they did? The newer ones are 4-speed?
Most of the new ones, they went to a 4-speed transmission.
Okay, and is that mechanism still the same, though?
No, this engine's pretty much obsolete now. They don't have too many of these around anymore at all. They went to a new design, I'd say roughly in 1959.
Okay.
Just a few years after this, and they changed it completely. That's when they went to the rotary valve, like we were talking about before.
Exactly.
Okay, now that we got this apart, we should be able to separate our case. Should be able to.
After Ron removes the clutch assembly from the left side of the crankshaft, he will swing the engine around and then he will remove the crankshaft from the engine cases.
Okay, that's a little gear that fits
Onto the clutch.
in the back of the clutch. And the power comes from the crank through the clutch and then back
Through the push gear, down into the gear cluster.
Right, okay.
And as I showed you before, the nut that's inside the clutch, to remove it is a tool like this, which is called a castle nut extractor. This is one of the things...
Set that tool with the nut.
Okay. They basically mate together. Because this is set inside the clutch, there's really not too many ways to get in there without destroying the nut or your crankshaft.
And that tool is available at the regular Vespa
Oh,
shop?
yeah, it's inexpensive. For the aggravation you go through trying to beat that thing off and causing damage to this crankshaft, it's not worth
So
it.
that should be in every Vespa owner's
If you've got a scooter, you're eventually going to need that. I mean, at any bike, if you're going to, a clutch is a normally rare item.
Right.
It should be maintained, it should be replaced at certain intervals. But now the other important part of this is, on your crankshaft, you've got a key slot. The clutch is aligned with the Woodruff key, the quarter-moon key.
Right.
Now, if this clutch nut is not tight, the force of that engine firing is going to cause that keyway to work its way loose. When that happens...
Because that's a press fit onto the crank itself.
And it's basically just slip fit with the keyway.
Right.
Then your nut just holds everything tight.
Right.
Okay, if that comes loose, it'll work your crankshaft to where you've got a lot of play inside your slot. When that happens, the crankshaft will be replaced. Eventually, it'll work its way and just break itself off. That's something we want to avoid, so that always has to be very tight. As we get in through here, we can pull our rear, show you the brakes. This is the rear hub, where actually the rear wheel fits right over this assembly.
It's like an automotive wheel.
Exactly. And this is basically a drum just like we would have on the car. This slides off. You've got a spline shaft, which slides onto your main shaft on the engine. So basically, this is what a main shaft would look
And
like.
that's the drive shaft that comes from the trans and drives directly to the wheel.
To the wheel, exactly. So this would be basically a direct drive shaft. And the other bikes, we looked at before, the lateral shaft, this would be a vertical.
And the other, or the one that had the chain drive for like the common motorcycle.
Right. Okay. This one, again, we're going to have to replace the shaft on this because somebody used a hammer or something to get the screw back on and off and the bolt. It actually is worn down the end of the shaft. And this is kind of important to have good threads back here if this comes off. Big problems. Okay. Now we can get up to the other side of the crankshaft here. There's another part you have to be careful with. You're going to be tapping the crankshaft out. So you want to give,
Just the crankshaft sits right in the bearing, not exactly a press fit, but a real tight tolerance.
It's a close tolerance to hold the crankshaft tight. So we'll tap this out over here. Voila. We got to kind of try and hold it, but... All right, this is basically your crankshaft. You got your bearings here, bearing up on top of the piston.
You can hear Ron's children in the background. They were in the shop with us and they were very well behaved. Next, Ron is going to remove the drive shaft and remove the other engine case from the swing arm. In 1958, the engine case, one engine case, was cast along with the swing arm in one unit, in one casting.
Transmission is just held together with a snap ring. Okay. Always happens. Snap ring, you have to be careful in the positioning of the gears. You don't want to put them in upside down. And we've also got a small spacer shim on top. As the gears run, they are wear on the lip. So these are available in oversizes so you can match it the way it should be. As we pull the gears out, so you got your 3 gears here. First one obviously has your kickstart mechanism on it. And sliding through the center of this whole thing is the shifting cruciform. And like we saw before, when we took it apart, we got your shifter assembly. This is where your cables actually come through and lock into the assembly. As you're shifting gears on the handlebar, it's changing the position of this lever here. This piece here locks into this here. As you're shifting your cables, it's pushing this lever inside. So to push it in, pull it out. And what it does is lock into the notches that are inside the gears.
And that's how you get your 3 different gears.
That's how you get your 3 different speeds. Slides from one to the other, and then we've got a gap in between first and second for your neutral. What is the basic Vespa engine? Through all 3 of the years, the only thing that's changed is a slight different design on the engine case. We explained it before. The 2 pieces of this engine case actually come apart. They made it in 2 separate sections. Where the newer ones are all one piece. Basically, they made it much smaller for that reason. Pull these bolts out here, and I'll actually show you how this thing slides apart. This piece in the back here is where we took the engine apart and we had the shock to come off. That's basically a shock mount. And this assembly here, slide apart.
And now Ron is going to show us some of the scooters in his shop. This is very interesting stuff. We're going to end up looking at a Vespa truckster.
Okay, Ron, we got this red scooter. What year is it? What is it? I mean, to tell you the truth, most scooters all look the same when it comes to these vintage scooters, but I know everything's different. So why don't you give me a rundown of what this red one is?
Okay, well, the red one here is a 1958 NSU Prima V from Germany. And basically back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, everybody was putting scooters together. As we talked about before, Harley Davidson had a scooter, a very popular one was Cushman. This one came along right about the middle of everything, and basically what they did was copy an older Lambretta. But as the Germans do with most stuff, they went a little bit further with the way they did it. This one here is actually, it's 150 cc's, does about 45 miles an hour. But the unique part of this one is that it has an electromagnetic starter.
You mean electric start?
No, electromagnetic.
Now, what does that mean?
Okay, well, the whole trick to this one was in the glove box here, they hide 2 6-volt batteries.
Okay.
Okay, then they got a big ignition key with a solenoid, basically like something you find on an old Ford mounted up underneath the box.
Okay.
So you get on this bike, put the key in, turn that key, the solenoid will click in, and you get juice from these 2 batteries going to the area around the magneto. And basically it was a series of coils around the magnet.
So by applying a DC current would cause the magneto to spin?
Basically, like we built in school, electromagnet. The force of the juice going through those would cause the engine magnets to spin. And it would slowly spin the engine over to start it.
Okay, and then you would disconnect the batteries?
As soon as the engine would start, you would just turn the key back and then would disconnect the batteries.
Okay, and then it would work in reverse, yes?
No, after the magneto would get spinning, then the juice would be created inside, right, exactly, to cause the juice for the engine to fire.
Right, and then would it also charge these batteries? Was that...
They had a charging mechanism in there, but I really hadn't ridden it enough to know how accurate it was.
This thing's pretty fast, but I noticed it's got the same kind of front suspension as a Vespa. No, maybe.
Basically, it's closer to a Lambretta. You'll be seeing one of those in a few minutes, too. And they basically stole the idea, with the same, the casting, and the big, huge casting for the front, for the headlight, the way the handlebars are designed, and actually even the sloping back with the rear rack idea in the back. Another interesting feature is that, Lambretta had springs on their seats. These guys went and put shocks underneath the seats.
Oh, really?
They always had the one up. The next guy.
So how much did something like this sell for back in those days?
On this one, I don't have too much information. No one's really seen too many of them. I believe it'd probably be around $500 to $600 at least. The next bike I've got here to show you is basically a Lambretta LD model, which is one of the first generations. Lambretta's been made as long as Vespa has been in business. The only problem with Lambretta is they jump from country to country. They originally started in Italy, then they moved over to Spain, and currently I believe they're being made in India. This is one of the original, the more sought-after versions, which was made in Italy, the original birthplace of the Lambretta. And you can see a lot of similarities compared to the one we just saw with the NSU. The different features this one might have would be that this is one of the first bikes that actually ran a shaft drive engine. This one, unfortunately, didn't have the fancy electric start or anything like that. It was more of a basic machine.
So that's the Kickstarter on the side there.
Right, you get your Kickstarter mounted here.
And what size was this engine?
This engine was a 150cc also, which is about basic. Most scooters around that time kept between 100 to 200 cc's. There's very few of them made any bigger than that.
And what was top speed?
The top speed on this would probably roughly be about 50 miles an hour.
And it's got an all steel chassis also?
Oh yeah, they're all metal. You saw very little plastic or anything back then. It's got the extra wide running bars with the floor rails and everything.
Okay, so the Vespas were made in what town?
Vespas originally came from Genoa, Italy.
Okay, and where were these made? Was it from town to town? I mean, these were built in different parts of Italy?
Oh yeah, they were very different and distinct. I'm not exactly sure of the original place that they came from. Like I said, they just never seemed to be able to keep a factory in one country for more than 10 years. They changed this design just like Vespa evolved from the older 50s style to the 60s. This changed just a few years after this.
And are they currently still making them, brothers?
Like you said, they're still making them, but I believe they're coming out of India.
Well, it's like the British motorcycle industry is, I'm hearing they make old Triumphs and things like that in India.
India's buying up a lot of the old industry. They seem to be making a good run of it. They make reproduction Vespas over there. They're making the Lambrettas. They're making Jawas over there now.
Right. So that was a Czechoslovakian.
Right, exactly. They bought them out. So basically what they do is they come in and buy up the old tooling and redo it. I guess labor is so cheap there.
Well, they got how many billion people. They got to be busy doing something.
Yeah.
Okay, Ryan, what is this imitation motorcycle here? What is this made by Allstate?
Okay, well, this is another bike that Sears actually sold through the late 50s up into the mid-60s. And this is the bike that the people are still around again for this one, too, making mopeds. It's made by Sterling Pook. And they made motorcycles for Sears, which were called the Allstates for those years. And they actually came up with a little bit of a scooter version that they sold through Sears for quite a few years.
Okay, now you're explaining, I'm going to come in on the engine now. But this is basically a moped engine?
It's basically a converted moped engine with a gearbox mounted underneath now.
And it's got a chain drive. Now, is the gearbox built into the engine? Or
it's all incorporated right into the engine case.
Okay, and this moped doesn't have a transmission clutch.
Basically, a moped just has an automatic clutch, a centrifugal clutch.
Okay, so does it have gears?
This one actually had a 3-speed transmission.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is they put it on a rocker foot pedal.
What do you mean a rocker foot pedal?
Well, here you got a ratchet shift.
so that's sort of like a motorcycle.
Yeah.
But it has a chain drive compared to the other two who had
The other two are chassis. This one here actually got a chain just like a moped would be. They basically took a moped chassis and just widened the front lip out a little bit. You see it's real skinny in the back, and they put a leg shield up on the front.
So they wanted to have the scooter image and use existing parts off the shelf.
Exactly. Just
using smaller wheels instead of bigger moped size wheels.
They did kind of went in between. No one had an intermediate, affordable scooter.
So where did something like this go for when it was new in the sales catalog?
I've got an old catalog in the back. I think they listed around $200. Or you could get it on your Sears plan for like $6 a month. All right, well, here's the last of the ones we're going to show you. This is a Fuji Rabbit. And it's modeled here about 1967, made in Japan. And it's basically a monster of a scooter. It's only 150 cc's, but it's actually quite quick. You can see a lot of similarities between this and one of the newer Honda scooters. They have the same design drive, only the newer scooters that Honda puts out, or the Japanese, are automatic. But this one actually has a 4-speed transmission.
So that's the shift mechanism sitting on top.
Well, you got
transmission.
You got your two cables here, one pulls in the gear, one pushes out.
Okay.
So you always have a rocker around the top. Exact same process. And you basically got a little cam here that the cables are attached to, which causes the shifting to go inside the engine case.
I know it's another thing. It's got a built-in rear fender. You would think you wouldn't need a fender, but it's sort of like some Japanese motorcycles come with a separate fender.
Well, basically, they build the engine and chassis first, then I think they design the body over it.
Vespa truck.
Right, it's actually considered a truckster.
Okay, why don't you give me a little rundown on this as we look at the video that I shot of it.
Okay, basically what we got here is a 1958 to a 1960, according to the numbers, Vespa truckster, which is basically they're used for industrial applications, delivery vans, and everything across Europe. Very popular machine over there for factory.
Do you have any idea how many they sold?
From the books and everything, they never sold them in the United States really commercially at all. But I believe they've sold tens of thousands of those all over Europe. Okay. You see some of the old Peter Seller Pink Panther movies, they use them for the phone company in those pictures.
Okay, now we're looking at the engine. Why don't you explain what they got? Electric start.
And basically, they came with an electric start. They ranged anywhere from 150 to 400 cc's. This one here is 150 cc's. It was originally a pickup truck, but the bed's been removed on it.
Okay, so they had electric start, they had a big generator, right? An extra generator. And what else are we looking at in this?
Well, basically, it's the same design engine case, but with a transfer case put on the end. Instead of going to the rear wheel, it goes to a gearbox. So you've got a 4-speed transmission with forward and reverse gears. And in the back, you have a shaft that runs from one side to the other down to a chain drive, which runs down to both wheels.
So it's two-wheel drive in the rear and steer in the front, just like a regular Vespa.
Just like a regular Vespa, just with a heavy-duty suspension, and even had handlebars inside instead of a steering wheel.
What a great collection. And now Ron is going to explain a little bit more about the crankshaft, the bearings at the crankshaft on the top and the bottom of the connecting rod. As we look inside this truckster, you can see it uses handlebars and not a steering wheel. So let's hear what Ron's got to say about the crankshaft.
Well, you're getting a little bit too much free play on the top end bearing of this connecting rod and piston assembly.
Well, compare that to the bottom bearing, because how do you check a bottom bearing? Basically, you look for up and down play. There's supposed to be a little side play.
Side play is perfectly fine. It's just you don't want any up and down play in it. This one's a nice, tight crankshaft. Another thing you might want to look for is rust on the bearing surface.
A little needed and a little tight. Let's show these bearings again.
So you can see these bearings are still shining.
A little bit. Okay. So the bearings are fine in the bottom.
Right. Usually what happens when the bike roughs up, like we saw in the bearings themselves on the case, is that you get a coating of rust around them, the surface isn't smooth anymore, and what it'll do is just eat itself up and give a real bad noise in the bearing.
Okay, now those bearings are available? That's not an impossible piece to get?
No, this stuff is pretty much going to be matched up to American standard bearings. A lot of people do that.
Okay.
Now, one thing you want to check is make sure that your threads are nice and sharp and clean. Common problem that people have is they take a hammer, they strike the end of the crankshaft, and they mushroom it out. When this happens, you're not going to get a good fit with your nut to hold everything on, and you've got to make sure that these nuts are on tight. If the nuts aren't on tight to hold either your flywheel or your clutch, the problem you're going to run into is that these keyholes that are cut here start to mushroom out. and you'll get a knocking in the engine, and this throws the timing off, because your timing comes off the key.
Okay, now to put that crank together, though, I mean, you press it apart, you put in a new bearing, a new connecting rod, and a new pin down on the bottom. Now, is that easy to do?
Well, on some it's easy, but another problem we run into, this one here is a piston port model like we explained in the first show. The newer bikes are rotary valve, so this is actually your sealing surface to the crankshaft. And if you get these out of round and not put back together right, you're going to eat up your crankcase. So every time this load comes up on the newer bikes, the sealing
Still the parts to redo the crank are available.
Yeah. You can still get most of the stuff here. And like I said, you go to most bearing shops and they can match them up. Okay, what you want to look for on this would be scoring or any kind of,
Which you can see scoring.
This has got a little bit of scoring, but what mainly this has is it's burnt. It should be obviously a brass color. This is darkened quite a bit.
Okay, now what can you do with that to fix it?
Okay, now this would have to go to a machine shop, have the old one drilled out, have a new one set into it, and then machine with the right clearances. And this would basically give it a small knock at probably acceleration and idle.
Thank you, Ron. And as you can see, the Vespas were well engineered, from the engines to the driveline, mounting the engine to the single-sided swing arm and the steel bodies. Thank you, Ron, for the education about these lovely Vespa scooters. Contact me, and I love to hear from my audience. It's teamdan45@gmail.com. Remember, you can always search on YouTube with Dan Schmitt Motorcycle Racing for great motorcycle racing action, Dan Schmitt Politics, to learn what makes America great. And I highly encourage you to visit the World of Motorcycle Museum. They're in Winamac, Indiana, 4 miles south of North Judson on Indiana Highway 39. But give them a call first at 574-896-3172. It's a great trip and a great collection of motorcycles. Remember, you can pick up your Team Chicago history package at Rich's Yamaha. They're in Lockport, Illinois on Archer Avenue. Give them a call first at 815-838-8130. Their website is richesyamaha.com, and pick up your Team Chicago history package. For more information on Walneck Swap Meet, their website is walneckswap.com. And here are some of the dates of some of the swap meets in Illinois, back at Woodstock, Morris, and Princeton.